we never went to the moon. If you examine pictures offered by NASA as genuine, you find that in many cases the shadows are not parallel. Well, since the sun was the only source of light, all shadows on the moon should be exactly parallel, but they aren't.
Because the lunar shadows fall in different directions, some conspiracy theorists claim that they were created by separate artificial light sources.
There's only one sun. There are not two. But these shadows are anomalous in that sometimes they are diverging from objects and sometimes converging. And it can't be. You can go any place on this planet when the sun's up and you look at two objects and those sun shadows are parallel.
But according to physicists, there are reasonable explanations for why we find that shadows aren't always parallel.
There's lots of different things which can make shadows go in different directions. I mean, obviously you have shadows pointing away from the sun, but if your camera is a wide-angle camera, you'll get a perspective effect on the shadows.
The effect of converging shadows is a well-known optical phenomena in photography. This effect is created where there is a single light source. For both the moon and the Earth, this source is the sun.
If you have bits of topography on the surface, like troughs, they can produce shadows which appear to be at right angles to the main direction of the sun.
But if we look at the photos, Aldrin appears to be brightly lit up. Shouldn't the astronaut's body be in darkness?
He's standing in a pool of light. It's a spotlight. It's not the sun. This is taken here on Earth under controlled studio lighting conditions with a whacking great, probably a 12K array spotlight.
On the moon, you're not just illuminated by the sun shining towards you and casting a shadow behind you, but there's also a huge area of the lunar surface around you, and that provides backlight to any subject on the moon's surface. You can also get reflections of light off bright objects like spacesuits, if they're fairly close to whatever they're illuminating.
And specifically the light bouncing off the highly reflective lunar module. In these pictures, you can clearly see where a pool of light appears. If you look at pictures where the astronauts are away from the module, the surface appears evenly lit. Another cause for suspicion among conspiracy theorists is Apollo's symbolic highlight, the American flag.
Wherever there's an American flag, it's always brilliantly lit up, even if it's on the shadow side. And on the shadow side, that should be really dark black. But they had little spotlights, obviously, because that's the only way you can do it.
Oh, geez, that's great. Is the lighting halfway decent?
The flag they took to the moon was made of nylon, which is fairly translucent material. It lets light through, so I wouldn't expect to see one side bright and one side dark.
Here we can see our flag brightly lit from the front, but if we move around to the back, we can see that even with our single light source, it's still brightly lit. The light is shining through and making the flag glow.
But why does the lunar flag wave around if there's no wind on the moon?
The stage sets were very hot, because when you film in slow motion, you need more light, because each frame is being exposed. They had 144 frames per second, so they needed very, very strong lights. Therefore, it was probably very hot. Probably they had some cooling.
Is this waving flag the ultimate proof the landings were faked in a studio? With no atmosphere on the moon, the planting of the Apollo flag has caused some controversy.
If you look at how the flag swings, the edge of the flag is acting like a pendulum. If you know the length of the pendulum, you know the time of the swing, you can say where the gravity is, and it was on Earth.
So how could the flag, flapping on the windless moon, be explained? Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin may not have been thinking about that question as they prepared for the historic moment.
Putting the flag on the moon was really a symbolic highlight of the mission. It was one that we had not really rehearsed. Neil knew where the flag was stowed. We brought it out, then we had to put the two pieces together.
It won't go up. Fade that end up.
The astronauts had to drive the flagstaff into the hard lunar surface with a twisting motion. A horizontal aluminium rod kept the flag suspended.
And this caused the free end of the flag to flip up and back in response to that. Also, this is an aluminum tube, very similar to the ones used on the Apollo mission. It's very springy. If I cause it to spring and then let go of it, we see that this motion continues long after I've let go of it.
Once it's in the surface, then those oscillations gradually dampen away over time, the vibrations going down the flagpole, and then it's pretty much stable after that.
Beautiful, just beautiful.
Conspiracy theorists point to another strange anomaly, one that can't be explained by lack of atmosphere. As the 16-ton landing craft touched down, its powerful rockets would be expected to blast away the top layer of dust, exposing the rocky lunar surface. But footprints were visibly photographed beneath the spacecraft, and there seems to be no dust on the landing pads.
One of the problems that was encountered, of course, is lunar dust. The moon is covered with it. And in fact, prior to landing on the moon, they'd sent unmanned landers. One of the concerns was the fact the lunar surface might actually be so dusty that any spacecraft that tried to land on it might actually sink in it. And if it wouldn't support an unmanned probe, it certainly wasn't going to support a manned one.
Ralph Rene devised an experiment to illustrate his notion that the rocket-powered lander should have left a crater. If a garden leaf blower, which is dramatically less powerful, can move dust with Earth's gravity, why didn't a rocket which produced 10,000 pounds of thrust?
They didn't move dry dust, they didn't move little rocks, they didn't move anything. So the demonstration is to show that this stuff will disappear immediately, and I'll even be able to gouge some kind of a hole.
If Rene is correct, the lunar surface, like the gravel pit, would show visible signs of disturbance.
But when it actually landed, the dust was all still there. Now, how can that be? You know, if you blow dust away, it goes away, like I just did here. I swept the ground.
Some people think that when you land on the moon, you should get a very big crater underneath the rocket nozzle on the lunar module. Now, that's not the case, because when they were coming in, they'd already throttled down to at least about a quarter of the maximum thrust. And just above the surface, they turned off the rocket motors. So any exhaust was actually pretty feeble when it landed on the moon's surface.
Descent engine did not leave a crater of any size.
If you look at the pictures, you can see a very slight depression underneath the rocket nozzle where dust and a little bit of soil has been radially blown away in different directions around the lunar module.
And a closer inspection of some of the photographs reveals that the landing did, in fact, disturb a very fine layer of dust, but not enough to cover the landing pads.
I can see some evidence of rays emanating from the descent engine, but very insignificant amount.
But the NASA images from the mission aren't the only proof of the module landing on the surface. Satellite images taken of the lunar surface in more recent years could suggest more compelling evidence of the Apollo landings. The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter is a robotic spacecraft launched by NASA in 2009 to orbit the moon.
Using some very high-resolution cameras and being relatively close to the moon's surface, it has actually been able to pick out each of the 6 Apollo landing sites. And not only the descent stages where they landed, but locations of the flags, the experiments, the 3 rovers that were left on the last 3 missions.
But some argue that these satellite images aren't as detailed as they expected when they were taken in 2011.
The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter was deliberately flown over what is purported to be the Apollo landing sites. And from a height of 12 miles, i.e. not very far at all, what do you see? A couple of pixels. If you looked at these images without NASA putting on a whacking grey arrow, you wouldn't know what you're looking at.
While satellite images of the equipment left behind may not be detailed enough to persuade some, there are other markers of man-made interference in the images.
I have to say, what you see is just 1 or 2 pixels, but you don't get a sharp picture, a nice clean picture of the lunar module. But the LRO pictures do show some discoloration of the area where the lunar module took off, so that seems fairly consistent with what NASA said.
Alongside the lunar reconnaissance images, evidence from other missions have also been able to confirm the Apollo landing sites.
Altitude 4200. Houston, you're a go for landing, over.
Of course, we've also had the Chinese and the Japanese with their own lunar missions. They are able to image the areas in which the landings took place, and there are evidence of soil disturbance. So you do have that third-party verification that the landings themselves took place.